Universal Broadcasting Network. Tune in at ubnradio.com.
Welcome to the National Safe Child Show, addressing the health, safety, and welfare of all children nationwide, because it shouldn't hurt to be a child. Here is your host, Tammy Stefano.
Hi folks, welcome to the National Safe Child Show. I know that we're starting late, 7:15. This is a new time that has been chosen for us. We are very excited. It's more of a prime time. It gives the listeners more of an opportunity to interact, and that's exactly what we're hoping will happen. And we just want to thank you for being so loyal to us and for being so loyal to the children, because we have to be a voice for the children, and without us pushing for that, then there's just no need to have this show. UBN Radio, we thank you and honor you for giving us this prime time spot. And I'd like to welcome with us today Jim DeCarli. Jim, introduce yourself. Jim has been on our show a couple of times now. Please tell the audience briefly about yourself, and you can look right in there.
Sure.
Look right at them.
Tammy. So, I'm Jim DeCarli. I'm an injury and neuroepidemiologist. I've worked in public health for the last 14 years. Mm-hmm. And I've done a lot of work in injury and violence prevention and the development of creating preventive programs to decrease risk factors to protect children as well as adults in violence and injury prevention.
Right, domestic violence included.
Right. Today,
we are going to touch on a topic that so many parents have said. I was in court today. It's high conflict divorce typically, and all of a sudden, the parent who brought allegations of the child disclosing abuse by the other parent hears the words deprogramming. And it typically comes from the guardian ad litem, the minor's counsel, opposing counsel, and nobody really knows what that entails, this deprogramming. I mean, I did some research, and the deprogramming that I came up with was more of a military deprogramming. And so I was amazed when I started to be sent transcripts where Minor's Counsel was asking for deprogramming therapy for the child. And it was concerning. So Jim is going to educate us a bit on the deprogramming therapy and what deprogramming really means. I mean, what does deprogramming mean for a child?
Sure. Well, what happens is when you have a child who has been exposed to a certain situation, there's a lot of priming that goes on. There's a lot of brainwashing that goes on. So you might have one parent that's talking to the child and defacing another parent, putting them down and making the child kind of feel like, wow, that's a bad person, or even turning things away into the child, like the child's at fault. So there's a lot of things that can go on. But once the child adapts to that environment, their brain is really starting to learn to adapt to whatever that environment is.
So there's a Stockholm type of?
Eventually, it does go into the Stockholm syndrome where they tend to adapt to that individual.
Right, okay.
So the deprogramming goes to where, for example, if they're with a perpetrator and then they're going to be going with another parent, they might not feel comfortable with that parent. They know they might have wanted to be with that parent at one point, but then now they might not want to be with that parent because they feel the sense of insecurity and fear that was instilled by the perpetrator, saying that this isn't a good person, there are some things you need to be careful of, and so all of a sudden they're not feeling protected, when in fact that's the one that's protecting them.
Children just don't know.
Right.
So this deprogramming therapy that therapists are doing with these kids, what happens? I mean, not that you're a therapist, and I realize that, and audience, Jim is not a therapist, but does the therapist start to tell the child what?
Well, with the type, depending on the type of therapy, I mean, there's a lot of different types of therapy, whether it's EMDR or cognitive behavioral therapy.
What is that,
we use,
EMDR?
Which is the
rabbit
EMDR is, it desensitizes the child from taking visual memories out of the visual cortex of the brain and links it to a specific behavior. So if there were trauma that the child was exposed to, they tend to deprogram the child from that. So you don't have the acting out behaviors. You don't have the fear. I mean, you might have a child that they might have been assaulted and they associate that with private places or in an elevator or in a certain room with a certain color, and then they start to feel that kind of fear. What they'll do is start to deprogram the brain so they're not, when they see the stimulus, they no longer associate that with fear, so the heart doesn't go into, their body doesn't go into fight or flight, and they all of a sudden start getting panic attacks. It'll actually back that up. So the EMDR will modify that from happening. And they use it a lot with different types of phobias as well. And then there's a cognitive behavioral therapy with different personality disorders as well.
Okay. So go ahead. I'm sorry. Cognitive. I just want them to hear you well.
Right. So the deprogramming, when we're talking about children who have been, with the different types of therapies, depending on which one it is, you're going to have a different, type of outcome. And it depends on the severity of whatever the trauma was.
Okay. So you said something a couple of minutes ago. You said that if they associate, say, a bathroom, like I have seen a lot of cases where the child is molested in a bathroom. So suddenly they don't want to take a bath like they used to. All children, I think, enjoy baths until a certain age at least.
Right.
And all of a sudden, they don't want to take a shower. They're fighting to take a shower. They don't want to be involved with that. They have also spoken or disclosed to whoever it is that they trust the abuse that has happened to them. Would this deprogramming actually almost erase those memories where, I hear a lot that children disclose, all of a sudden they start to go to this therapy and they are recanting.
They won't forget about the incident, but unless there's certain ages. If it's before 4 years old, then there's the developmental amnesia that occurs with abuse. And then over time, if it's even in 6 or 7 or 8, by the time they get to being 12 or 13, they actually might forget about that, and especially if it's a little bit over time. And if they're removed from the abuse, they actually could forget. And that's part of the developmental amnesia that occurs. That's the brain pruning certain memories off that they no longer need. But that doesn't mean there won't be acting out behavior accordingly as well.
Right.
They just won't associate that with that behavior. And that's why you have a lot of kids that do come into therapy or have problems as teens or late teens, early adolescence, middle adolescence. And the therapist will ask, well, have you have any history of trauma? It's like, no, I came from a very loving family. They were really good. Well, if the abuse happened at a very young age, they're not going to remember that. And the parents might not want the child to know because of relationship problems and issues. And they want
later in
the
life
family to be, they want the family to be together. They might not want to disclose that to a child, like if it was an uncle or a brother or a sibling or something like that. So the child would not even recall that.
Wow. So you bring up a good point. Some parents have become the bad, guilty parents in the eyes of the child because they are traumatized that they had they were not able or not allowed through the court system for whatever reason to protect this child. There were allegations. They fought for the child. They lost custody. And now they don't forget, obviously, and they're still holding on to that, but the child has let go. And all of a sudden, the child begins to dislike the parent, and the parent is saying, you told me all of this. Don't you remember? Don't let him brainwash you, or don't let her brainwash you. And the child, I don't know I mean, are you saying that the child truly doesn't remember, or the child is just blocking it up because they are sick of having it brought up? Or is it really an amnesia where...
It would all depend. I mean, if you're talking about a child that's was traumatized at 4 years old and they're 5 or 6, they're going to remember that. But if they're 10 or 11, 12, they're not going to remember the one when they were 4 years old.
So in other words, even though this really happened, the parent's life has been turned upside down. And they know what happened because their little child came and told them in detail. But nobody else believed. That child is not going to remember, even though they will have characteristics that will be displayed: promiscuity, abuse of substances or alcohol, just very high-risk behavior.
Right. Well, and especially if it's been untreated, then they're definitely up for at-risk, behavior if there's no treatment done.
So, deprogramming. If they do remember and they are holding it and they want to tell somebody, and every time they tell somebody, you've got CPS, and I've shared a lot of instances that parents share with me, with you, whereas CPS is, in many times, many instances, just they'll do anything to avoid addressing the abuse.
Right.
And it's my belief that a lot of the responders, these ER, emergency response social workers that go out, they're either untrained or they just don't want to. I don't quite understand, because it's 1 and 1 still equals 2 in my world. You need somebody who's going to meet the child, especially that first person who has a lot of experience, because that may be the only time that the child discloses. And typically, DCFS is going to the perpetrator's house because that's where the child is residing, and the child doesn't disclose, then there's strike 1. Like 3 strikes, you're out, folks. Well, strike 1 is when the child doesn't disclose because they are fearful, not because they don't remember at this point, but that they are fearful. That's the first adult that they watch walk out of their lives. That's the first little lack of trust that they feel for disclosing, and comfort level that they feel for disclosing. But the parent keeps saying, this happened to my child, and they're reaching out and they're filing an abundance of different pleadings within the courts, and then deprogramming.
Right.
Sometimes, why would, for example, that there is always corruption in every entity, including the court form, unfortunately. So, say, for example, a minor's counsel, a court-appointed child's attorney, makes the suggestion, Your Honor, I think that this child needs deprogramming because this child continues to believe that he or she has been molested. But DCFS has done an investigation and it's unfounded.
Right. And those are the areas that that's a big red flag. Because just because DCF hasn't found it, doesn't mean it's not there.
Absolutely. We know that, yeah.
Right. And so it doesn't mean that those memories need to be erased or that child needs to be primed or brainwashed, essentially, to think that nothing ever happened. That's because...
But that's what it seems like they are shooting for.
Right.
Is there a way that a good therapist who's familiar with deprogramming can get that child in their office and erase that memory? Is it possible?
If you put that child in therapy and you had put them in a fMRI scanner, a brain scanner, to really look at if you would put them in a scanner, you're going to actually be able to see what regions of the brain are functioning based on certain types of questions you're asking them. So it is possible they might be able to talk them down.
How?
But
talk them down.
You're still, if the child believes it, and there's no other types of developmental disorders or psychological disorders, then.
But nobody believes. The problem that I see time and time again is the child knows it happened.
Right.
I believe it happened. The parent that the child is close to, they damn well know it happened.
Right.
The problem is nobody else wants to address it. An attorney that we work with, attorney Jennifer Ani, if she's watching, hi Jennifer, she says, and I agree, it's just the most uncomfortable conversation or topic that anybody wants to address.
Right.
It's almost like anybody would prefer to address anything else but
Right.
child sexual abuse.
Right. And what ages are you talking about most of this would occur?
Well, it would be the younger. It would be the younger ages typically
As
when they
in
get
under 5 and under, or between 6 and
most
12?
of the cases that I see, but a lot of them are younger. But most of the cases that I see are about between 4 and 8.
Okay, right. So, the developmental amnesia, you're catching those cases when they're pretty fresh in their mind. So you really don't have, that's probably not going to exist. You're not going to have that. Say, for example, if
That same memory.
They're going to remember it. They should remember that at that age.
But what if they don't? What if they suddenly recant? So many of them do. So many of them are put in the perpetrator's
because they could
custody.
block it because it's too painful for them to accept or want to even believe. And they might actually feel at fault because the perpetrator might have turned it around to them and say, well, this is because of you, something you've done. They might feel ashamed. They might feel that they've done something wrong, and now that's why there's problems. So they might want to block it. So there's those things that could happen.
But the deprogramming, the therapist meeting up with these children and saying, sweetheart, it didn't happen. I know you believe that because that's what so-and-so is telling you. That's what so-and-so believes. But it did not happen. And mommy or daddy is a good person and they don't want to hurt you, and they go through this regimen.
Yeah. These are things that you'd have to look at the case by case.
I hate to put you on the spot, and I'm sorry, Jim.
Because if you look at a specific case and you say, well, okay, so has there been certain types of tests that were done that were failed?
Okay.
So say, for example, a child says that, so if they were sexually assaulted, exactly what does that mean? What did occur? So if you're going to have something that there's scarring and there's bleeding, these are physical results that those could confirm that something did happen, that there was some abuse.
Right.
So if those had been all removed or there was none of that found, and again, it would depend on the type of abuse that occurred.
Well,
so if you have those and say there's physical evidence and they're still saying, oh no, nothing happened, but then, okay, then why is this happening? I'm assuming the cases you're referring to, it's not at that level to where they're not going to have vaginal bleeding or they're not going to have scarring.
Well,
but if they do have those and they're still saying, well, no, nothing happened to you. Okay, but then we have medical evidence.
Well, I have a case right now that in fact does have medical evidence. I think that, yeah. And it doesn't matter because the only entity that these kids have when it comes to this is DCFS. And DCFS is not a good system. It's not a working system right now. Mm-hmm. I wish it were, because we do need a system, no doubt. Right. There's real abuse going on, and there's a lot of abusers, and we do need a system that works. Unfortunately, here in Los Angeles and in many counties and towns and cities across the country, it doesn't work.
Right.
Child Protective Services doesn't work. Now, there's cases that you get good social workers and it works, and they do a great job, and the kids are saved. Would you consider deprogramming therapy? If I said, Jim, I consider deprogramming therapy no different than brainwashing. Would that be an accurate statement?
The way you're framing it, yes.
It
The way
would.
you're saying it is, yeah, that would be.
Yeah.
Because you're not validating the child. So if the child is saying something, an adult should validate that. They have real feelings. And for somebody to tell that child, the way you're feeling, it's not right.
Right.
Okay. Now, if there's evidence to show that, then there probably needs to be some sort of therapy for that. But
Well, they're not.
if it's the way
The
you're
problem
saying
is,
it,
they're not getting the therapy. The therapy that whatever entity
they're
wants
just
to
not
have.
validating it. So they don't want to they're not validating the child, and that puts the child at more risk, because now to be re-victimized, they're at a higher risk, because if there was abuse that did occur and you're telling them they're not going to come forward next time.
We have one of our audience members. She's saying her grandchildren were 3 and 4 years old. Wait a minute. 3 and 4 years old. And another listener said they all recant. The attorney said, of course they do. Why do they recant?
I don't know if I have a good answer for that.
Okay.
Because you
I
would
appreciate that.
I would really.
We're going to find somebody that has that answer. And I appreciate you not guessing at it. Listen, we don't have all the answers. We're all navigating through this.
Because there's so many confounders that I could see, and you really would want to look at. You wouldn't want to generalize it. You'd want to also look at the cases, because it could be very different why.
You told me something that has just stuck in my mind. You keep going back to the MRI. You feel confident that an MRI is going to determine what?
Well, it could, and it'll tell you when somebody's in a brain scan.
Okay.
And you can see the function of the brain in real time.
Okay.
So when I'm asking you a question, and I'm going to have you explain to me what happened. Now, you could make things up.
Right.
And then I can see it in the brain what part
of the brain is
really functioning.
Okay.
And that's going to tell me, is it coming from long-term memory? What part of the brain is it coming from? And it's going to let me know whether or not you're actually telling the truth.
Really?
If it's something, so we'll be able to tell that.
Is it more accurate than, say, a polygraph?
Yes, definitely more accurate.
Have they ever used an MRI?
The polygraphs.
We have a caller. I'm sorry. Hi, caller. Are you on with us? Welcome to the National Safe Child Show.
Hi, how are you?
Doing wonderful. How are you?
Good. I have a delay from the actual program, so I'm probably a little bit behind you guys.
Listen to the phone, not the.
I am.
I am. Okay, perfect. So what's going on? You have a question for Jim?
Well, I did, Jim. In listening to your comments, I was wondering, how do you make that initial assessment if the child has actually been abused or not?
Well, I mean, from a neuroscience standpoint is what I'm referring to. So what is it that you're asking? Is it as far as I'm validating the child?
Right, because I thought I heard you say that, that sometimes this deprogramming can be a good thing. Did I hear that, or did I hear that wrong?
Correct. Sometimes it can be. And it depends what you want to try to achieve. Human behavior, and with the way behavior works, it could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing. So you can have brainwashing that's more on the negative side. Then you could have psychotherapy that's actually trying to remove certain types of memories, and that's what you want to do. So there is a positive and a negative side to it. So with the brainwash, yes, go ahead.
Has your training shown you that it's possible to actually erase from the perspective of an MRI a bad memory?
You can erase not necessarily the entire memory, but the way you cope with it. So when you have a memory that is from trauma or a stimuli that's resembling something in the trauma, your body doesn't go into fight or flight. You're not starting to panic. You're not feeling that fear. You're not going to react to it. You're actually going to be able to respond to it. So it's the way to help you better cope. As a victim, you'll be able to cope with it.
Right. We can't change who we are, but we can change how we react to our environment.
Correct.
Right. I agree.
Yes.
But what if, I'm still stuck on, what if the child does remember and there's just a bunch of bad players and all they want to do is protect the perpetrator for whatever reason? Maybe that perpetrator is connected and they want the child to forget. Can they do that through this deprogramming?
It is possible, yeah. It would be possible because you're trying, but they wouldn't necessarily forget, but let me back up. They will always remember it, except for the developmental amnesia, and that is more because of the brain is developing. The brain is developing. So the developmental amnesia, I'm talking about when they're under 4 years old, and then you're talking about it later when they're 10 or 12 or 13 or 14.
Well, no, but I'm talking about maybe 5 or 6, 7 years old.
So they'll remember, but what's going to happen is they might be able to. Yeah, so there'll be a set of learned helplessness that will be the result of this. Because if you're saying you're essentially not validating the child. If you're not validating the child, they will not express how they feel.
So what happens? What would be the character of a child that wasn't validated, that had this deprogramming? If we just had to give a hypothetical, what does that child look like?
Could be shy, very quiet, not speaking up, definitely not speaking how they feel, not expressing their own needs, and then later on, not knowing how to satisfy their own needs, not how to be able to be happy, to be able to get the things they want. So it could have some long-term detrimental effects on the child's child development.
Right. I think that's an understatement. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I do see now though, and listening to your guests, I definitely see the value of that treatment, and so I think it could be used in a very positive fashion. I also see Tammy's side of it as well, in that a perpetrator could use it in a very evil fashion.
And it's unbelievable because most things can be used either for good or for bad. They have two prongs, and in many instances, there's a lot of good that can be used, but there's also the bad. And, this is just one of those instances.
And that would
be
the
human condition, eh?
Yes, yes, exactly. Later on in life, could this deprogramming be implemented through therapy with an adult and have them be deprogrammed from all of the brainwashing from the perpetrator where they remember? Could we do it opposite?
Oh, sure. And that's what different therapies are designed to do. When you're talking about the deprogramming, that's similar to EMDR, and it's similar to cognitive behavioral therapy. You're actually modifying the behavior. So yeah, it's definitely.
This is, it's a little scary, I have to tell you. I see a therapist, and I'll tell you, I don't want any of that stuff going on. I'll be the decision maker.
Well,
because, it could be good, but it could be bad.
Right. Well, a good therapist isn't going to try to brainwash you.
Right.
They're not going to be it's going to be up to you. You have a contract with them, what you want to change, and they assist you through that.
Right. But I'm
could be
talking.
some-
I'm
It
only
all boils down to ethics, I think, right?
right.
Exactly.
Right. Well, I'm always looking at the bad ones. You know, the sinister therapists that have something else behind the closed door type of deal.
Right. And
you
that's
know.
what you're saying with
There
these
are
children.
there are
that
many
come in.
many good ones too, though. I
Oh,
I think
gosh.
it's
In abundance.
like individuals suck, groups don't suck generally. You know?
That's right. That's right. That's absolutely right. It's more of the state workers that. Sorry for the good state workers, but.
Yeah, I'm being nice. You know.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. I mean, I'm really just concerned. My biggest concern. I mean, I know I looked into biofeedback and heard some fabulous stories from people that were abused, that did have amnesia, didn't remember, just knew that something wasn't right. And well in their later years, they went for biofeedback, and all of a sudden, boom, like a truck just hit them. And they remembered this abuse.
Right. And that's
We
why
have
it's,
another call? Caller?
Hi, Tammy.
Hi, how are you?
I'm okay.
Oh, I'm glad that you called.
I wanted to address something
Good.
about my grandchildren that were abused at 3 and 4. They went for therapy for a really long time. They disclosed all the abuse. It was confirmed by Children's Assessment Center and the therapist and a second therapist. And then finally they went to a third therapist that was ordered by the judge, a court-appointed therapist. And she started the brainwashing with the kids.
This deprogramming therapy.
Yes, by changing the way she would ask about us, and the kids would tell her, she would change it around. So as a result of her doing that constantly with the kids, telling them different things, we now can't see the kids. We are not allowed any contact with the kids because I made a statement to my grandson and my granddaughter, and I always told them how much I loved them. I would say, I love you more than anything. The therapist turned that around and said, so, Grandma loves you more than the mother.
Wow.
And just on that, based on that statement alone, the judge said, that's it. No more contact, nothing. Said to my son, your mother is now bad-mouthing the mother again. But in the same letter that went to the judge from this court-appointed therapist, my grandson disclosed to her once again the sexual abuse that he had to go through.
Mm-hmm.
And the judge totally ignored that. The therapist, the court-appointed therapist, totally ignored that.
We definitely, well, I'm sorry. Jim, do you want to chime in on this? Or is there anything, I mean, what happened with the children? Did they start recanting or
No,
not
they
believing?
didn't. What they did was they put it on the back burner of their mind.
Okay.
Now they're having different triggers, different things are triggering them where they go into a rage. Both children, they are now 7 and 8. It happened when they were 3 and 4. Now they go into a rage.
and when they go into these rages, what is when does that occur?
That's been going on now probably for a year. The mother has been out of their life basically since 2011. She has telephone contact with them, and she has visits with them, which, are here and there, but the kids are always acting out. After a phone call, the kids are starting to act out, back-talking my son and his new wife, and they're having severe meltdowns.
Is it so, Jim, is what you're asking, when do these triggers take place? In other words, is there kind of a systemic time that you can point out where they are filled up with rage versus maybe in the school they don't have these outbursts?
Right. Is it normally during? Yeah. Is it right after they're talking with with a specific individual or around school or friends or other family members?
They're not doing it in school. My grandson, however, was acting out. He was a bully, and he's a very tiny little boy, and he started hitting and punching and talking back and swearing. And the little girl has severe meltdowns where she just absolutely goes ballistic. She goes limp.
Right.
She says she can't walk. She can't see. She doesn't want to be clean.
Right. And see, a lot of that, I mean, that's where you have more because of the negative consequences of this deprogramming and
Right.
that go on. And, having children not being validated, and also some of the comments that were made about how, what the judge said about to the children. I mean, if you have judges and social workers just negating the fact that this even happened,
That's
you're
right.
not validating the children. They're not able to express how they feel, and that's detrimental to the child. I mean, as they go on, they don't know how to communicate with people. They don't know how to express how they feel.
It's a form of abuse when you make children keep reliving it over and over and over. And what the therapist did what the judge did after a year and a half of them being with a major organization out here that deals with children of trauma, he suspended them. My son took the kids to another therapist. They were in with that therapist for four months. She disclosed the abuse. The judge got so upset, he said, "That's it. Now I'm court ordering someone for reunification therapy," which meant they were Skyping with the mother, and then the meltdown started.
So it's after.
Wow.
So I'm assuming that the mother was the...
Perpetrator.
Yeah.
The mother and her children from her first marriage were sexually abusing my grandchildren for months.
Wow. And were her children, to your knowledge, abused also?
Her daughter, who is now 15, was sexually abused by the father at age 4. The father spent 18 months in prison.
18 months?
18 months, yes.
I mean,
I know.
drunk drivers
know.
get more. Come on. It's such a joke.
Well,
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead, chime in. Yeah, it pisses me off.
I just that the sentencing structure of our penal system is amazing, isn't it? It
Yes.
never ceases to wonder.
Yes, it's amazing. 18 months.
Arbitrary, I'd say. Arbitrary, capricious.
Yes,
Those words.
thank you. Perfectly put. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that
I know.
this is happening. It's such a broken system. It's such a broken system.
Yeah, getting back to the therapist, though, that is what she did for the months that she's seen the kids for this reunification therapy, that she put words into their mouth constantly. And then the kids had told my son, she said, this is what she said. She said, you don't love us, you don't want us.
Wow.
And the kids started having the meltdowns. They started having a really difficult time.
Right.
So this particular case, I had...
So I have a question.
Yes.
Who sets, so in therapy, right, there, as I know it, there are generally goals that are set between the therapist and, the client. Who sets the goal in these, deprogramming cases, and how is it set? And what, if any, influence does the child have on the goal?
Well, I can just say from the woman that's on the phone, because I worked this case quite often, so I'm so familiar with it. We had 3 different therapists that all believed the children, both children. And the children were very detailed. They were not vague in their description. And it was over a significant period of time. And they were fearful. And they wrote reports to the courts saying, this was not a coaching situation, this happened. And every time that this court, a very, very bad judge, got these reports, his order was not to address what these children were saying or what the therapist was saying, but to instead change the therapist. They are on their 4th therapist. All 3 therapists, and he kept changing. And he would say, you can't see this. And there were 2 programs that were actually state programs. So the department used these programs. They weren't handpicked by the parents. They were state programs based on the health insurance. The 4th therapist he chose by name, and he said, I will not have the children see anybody else but this therapist. That therapist is the only therapist out of the 4 that said, never happened. This was a coaching situation. And research and some investigation by Grandma, who's fabulous, turned up that therapist was sexually abused when she was a child. Ironically. Yeah. And she even put some YouTubes up.
You can deal with what you're comfortable with, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's unbelievable that you've gone through the abuse and that you wouldn't give a child the honor of listening to them and believing them.
Or having the compassion for them and the empathy for the child, knowing the impact and how damaging it is. So you have somebody like a therapist who is more likely untreated or has not been treated.
Right.
And needs to continue to have more treatment.
So what happens if they're not treated? Do they typically, I always look at it, I mean, again, sinister thinking, like they just look and say, well, nobody helped me, so I'm not going to help. I really do think like that. I'm sorry. Yeah, because I see it too much. I'm not going to help this child, and nobody believed me, so nobody should believe you. And just hide it, and you'll be okay, just like I am.
Yeah. And
isn't it funny that I think the general sentiment of just armchair quarterback pop psychologist, I think that they would say the opposite to that. But isn't that interesting? That in other words, because I was damaged, I'm going to assume that you're damaged as well.
Right.
Kind of the Archie Bunker, like psychology of it.
Yes.
That's so interesting to me. It is. I mean, the ethics of psychologists must be studied for a lifetime.
Absolutely.
She said this therapist said she was looking for justice.
Yeah, and she didn't find it. She put this on YouTube. Mm-hmm. So this is through her own admission. We have another caller. Hi, caller. I'm sorry, ladies. Hi, caller. Welcome to the National Safe Child Show.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. Is this Tammy?
This is.
I just want to say I love your show, and I tell you what, it has brought so much awareness to me, and I want to thank you so much for bringing all of these things to my attention through the few months that I've been listening to your show.
Wow, thank you so much. I'm so happy that...
And I just want to tell you, you're wonderful, and thank you for caring for the children.
Oh, thank you so much, caller. I really, heartfully, I feel like crying. It's hard work, and I'm so grateful that you've learned something. We have great guests that come on, and we're all just doing our best, and I really honor you for making this call. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Now, am I on the air?
You are live.
Oh, wonderful. Am I live? Oh, because
you're live.
I have the show on, and I don't hear myself right now. Maybe there's a delay.
Oh, there could be. Did you have any questions?
Well,
did you want to chime in on this conversation?
I didn't. I just turned it on. I had run out tonight. I had to be somewhere, and I missed most of the show. So I would be asking a question that I don't know what I'd be asking because I missed most of the show tonight. But I'm listening to the last few minutes, and I got through. I mean, your phones are busy sometimes, and I just wanted to say you're wonderful.
Thank you so much. Keep listening. We have some fabulous guests coming on. You know that the time has changed. We try to post it everywhere and just spread the word. And I encourage you to contact me anytime at voiceofachildri@yahoo.com. And if you have suggestions for a topic that you would like for us to cover, we'd be happy to. We want to try to cover every topic that affects...
Oh, I will be certain that next time I call, I'll be a little more prepared.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks again for calling.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Tammy, for taking my call.
Certainly.
Tammy, I have a question for Jim.
Okay.
So do you think deprogramming equals brainwashing?
Well, it can be a form of brainwashing, yes, especially if it's done on the negative side.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're, if the brainwashing is part of a team, you have a judge and a therapist saying, you don't believe that, do you? I mean, your mom actually molested you? You don't believe that. So when you have somebody doing that, it's going to have detrimental effects on the development
Children
of the
are
child.
so vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, they need to have the adults there, the support, a very strong team. So, yeah, definitely, if they're not validating the child won't believe themselves. They will later have some negative consequences. So it is a form of brainwashing, yes, unfortunately.
So it's brainwashing, yes. In a nutshell, yes.
Yeah, right. Because she would dangle, what kid doesn't like to play or have treats? And so when they would go into this reunification therapy, she'd say, if you don't talk to your mom, if you don't Skype with your mom, you can't have candy, you can't have playtime. You have to say this. This is what you need to be saying. And that came out, months later after they were seeing this therapist, but she was manipulating them.
I can't even imagine that a therapist, that's so unethical for a therapist to ever go beyond her scope of treating the child, certainly to talk about rewards that the children will have after they leave, other than if it was a reward type of system, if there was a behavioral issue, and they were thinking about some actions that could earn rewards to better the child's behavior and to make them more aware. I mean, I've heard of that, but not to say you can't have candy. Yeah, she's a sicko, but let's tell the audience how long she lasted in California. She has fled, hasn't she?
Yes, she has. She is in another
therapist.
state.
Yeah,
Yes.
actually fled.
Yes.
Yeah.
But here's what she did. I will tell you this. She called CPS on my son.
Before she fled. Right before.
Before she left.
Yeah. Like, I'll get you. I couldn't win. That's the sinister stuff that I'm referring to, folks.
And it's those kind of therapists that people need to try their best to report them. I mean, there's national associations and there's licensing that and a form of ethics that they need to follow, and really try your best to find these associations and networks to try to report them. So they, when they go to another state and they take that licensing exam, there's a sense of follow-up from where they went to.
Where can people, we're almost out of time.
Okay.
Deprogramming, folks, my understanding and my experience with deprogramming is the judge makes an order based on recommendations that are given to him from court-appointed officials or the alleged perpetrator's counsel. And typically they are handpicked because there's a group that are well known and used often, whereas the typical therapist that really is ethical, they're only used when there's real therapy and not brainwashing going on. Where can folks go? Do you have, and I know I'm catching you off guard now, where can they complain to?
Well, that's a good question.
Okay.
I mean,
We
it's
need
tough
to-
because
right.
there's what you're talking about is if they're in a system and they have a open case with DCFS, there's all the
they're
complaints.
screwed.
Yeah, there's nothing.
They're
to
done.
do.
Yeah, they're
to be able
screwed.
to
I
do-
mean,
to be able
we
to
don't
do
have to go.
your own research and own work, there are books on brainwashing that have been written. that are pretty good.
Any that come to mind?
Oh gosh. No, I know you
Okay.
can go to brainwash. There's one called brainwashingchildren.com, I believe.
Oh, nice.
Do a search
Okay.
on Yahoo or Google with
Okay.
brainwashing children in divorce, and you're going to see a lot that will come up.
Okay.
And there's a few networks there that might give you some resources.
So, thank you. Just like the common belief back in the day was child molesters, child abusers had the long trench coat on and the hat, and you couldn't see them because they hid in the shadows. Well, we now know that they are the Jerry Sandusky's. They are the pillars in the community. Not all pillars in the community, naturally. We have a lot of great people, and we have a lot of bad people. It seems like brainwashing is not hidden amongst cults or what we might have preconceive as being this brainwashing. We kind of have a preconception of what brainwashing is. Actually, it's being implemented through child therapy to children. Sometimes it works for their benefit. Sometimes it works for their detriment, and it's not beneficial for them, and it's actually stealing that ability for them to be able to heal. So, folks, brainwashing.com, Jim DeCarli, as always, we are honored to have you. Jim is an expert with, please just give your website, and we have to go in a moment.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. Yeah, we do have a website, proconsumersafety.com as well as procarseatsafety.com, and we have information on Parent Central at both of those websites.
Excellent. And Jim has given expert testimony during court hearings. He knows a lot about the brain, and he can tell when he looks at the brain if a child has been traumatized. And that in itself is something that cannot be hidden. Thank you, Jennifer, for calling. Lainey, we honor you so much, and all of the viewers tonight, and UBN Radio, we honor you, folks, and let's think of some good topics, and let's get busy. We're on Friday nights now, 7 o'clock. We're excited, and we love you. Have a great Friday and a safe Friday evening.
Thank you for listening to the National Safe Child Show on UBN Radio. For past episodes, visit the archives on ubnradio.com, and for more information, go to nationalsafechildcoalition.com. The views and opinions expressed in these radio programs are those of the individual hosts and do not reflect the official policy or position of Universal Broadcasting Network.